At 6 in the morning, in a February cold sharp enough to cut through denim and pride, I found a white Lexus SUV sitting dead center in my winter wheat field like it had been dropped there by a fool. Frost still silvered the ground, coffee steamed in my hand. My blue heeler Grit was circling that car with the low growl he saves for trespassers, and behind me my Excavator was idling with that deep diesel thump that sounds like trouble. Then Beverly Pruitt stepped out and said, sweet as poison, "We just need to do a little surveying, Mr. Warden. It's for the good of the community." I took one slow sip of coffee, looked past her at the Excavator bucket, and thought, well, maybe this is finally the morning she hands me the whole case. My name is Colt Warden. I'm 58, born and raised in Harlan County, Tennessee, and I've worked these 140 acres my whole life. My grandfather bought this land in 1951. My father kept it going, and when it came to me, it came with one lesson. If you want to keep land, you'd better outlast the people trying to take it. The trouble started when the old Tillman parcel beside my western fence line got sold to a developer and turned into Sunrise Estates brick houses, neat mailboxes, decorative shutters, the usual dream of country living without any actual country in it. At first, the HOA was harmless. Then Beverly moved in. Beverly was 62, a retired HR director from Nashville, always dressed like she might have to testify before Congress. She ran for HOA president because nobody else wanted it, won with 11 votes, and within 3 months started sending complaints to me, a man who was not in her HOA and never would be. First, my grain silo was an aesthetic nuisance visible from their walking trail. Then my pre-dawn tractor lights were supposedly disrupting residents' sleep cycles. Then she filed with county zoning, claiming my livestock operation was a nuisance under some obscure ordinance she'd dug up. That got dismissed, but it still cost me money and time. I tried being polite. At a county meeting, I told her straight that my farm was lawful. My rights were clear, and she needed to govern the subdivision that elected her instead of the land that predated her by 60 years. She smiled and said, every community has a character, and sometimes that character requires updating. That was Beverly in one sentence. She didn't want peace. She wanted the map rewritten until my farm stopped being a farm and became a view. By summer, she filed an application to force me to plant a tree buffer along my boundary at my expense so Sunrise Estates residents wouldn't have to look at my fields. My attorney, Prescott Hale, killed that in one phone call. Agricultural exemption, he said, Section 14-209. Been there since 1998. We objected, the county rejected it. And I made the mistake a lot of people make after one small win. I thought maybe she'd stop. Instead, she started whispering at the farmer's market that I had runoff problems, maybe even chemical contamination near the creek. That hit different. A complaint is paperwork. A rumor is rot. So I stopped reacting and started collecting. I called the Tennessee Department of Agriculture and requested a voluntary compliance inspection. Walked the whole property with them. They came back spotless, signed, and stamped. Then I started logging everything: dates, complaints, screenshots, witnesses, report numbers. Reva, who handles my books, built folders before I even asked. My nephew Taft started photographing anything odd near the western fence. I kept my head and built my file. Then the twist showed up. A local reporter named Glenwood Fitch came out after I invited him to look over the documentation for himself. I didn't pitch him a story, I just showed him facts. Standing by the fence one afternoon, he said, casual as could be, Ridgerest Properties has been asking around about expansion. Phase 2 would need adjacent land. There it was. Suddenly every complaint, every filing, every rumor made sense. Beverly wasn't just an HOA tyrant with too much free time. She was pressure. Make farming here irritating enough, costly enough, lonely enough. Eventually I'd sell. Then Prescott found the thing that turned this from harassment into dynamite. He pulled the original development agreement between Ridgerest and the county. Buried in it was a 10-year non-harassment covenant. Ridgerest, its agents, and any HOA tied to the development were prohibited from initiating legal or administrative action against adjacent agricultural landowners inside the buffer zone. In plain English, the people harassing me had already signed paperwork promising not to do exactly that. Prescott told me not to rush. Don't use it yet, he said. Every new complaint is another breach. Let her keep digging. And Beverly, true to form, kept digging. She blocked my gate once with traffic cones and a fake environmental survey. Later, she posted aerial images of my property on Facebook, covered in arrows and circles, urging residents to document potential violations on my farm. Prescott took one look at the screenshots and said, "Save every single thing." This just became defamation. By then, I had 2 years of logs, dismissed complaints, a clean state inspection, social media evidence, a reporter with his own notes, and a covenant that could light up Ridgerest's lawyers. Taft called me at 6:02 and said, "Uncle Colt Beverly's car is inside the Southfield gate." I was awake, dressed, and had the excavator warming up for a drainage ditch project that had been planned for months. I drove down, photographed the Lexus from every angle, property markers, gate, tire tracks, frost, all of it. Then I called the sheriff's non-emergency line and filed a trespass report. Then I texted Glenwood. Then I climbed into the excavator and went back to work. And I want to be crystal clear here. I never touched her vehicle, never threatened her, never damaged a thing. I just continued my scheduled drainage work on my own land following the planned route, which happened to leave that Lexus boxed in by a fresh 3-foot trench on 3 sides and soft-turned earth on the 4th. By mid-morning, her SUV wasn't hurt, but it also wasn't going anywhere without a tow truck and a hard conversation. When Beverly came back with 2 HOA board members and her husband Thad, they stood there staring at that Lexus. Then she looked at me across the ditch and said, "You did this deliberately." And I said, "No, ma'am. I'm doing documented drainage work on private property. Your vehicle appears to have trespassed into the middle of it." That was the moment the whole thing cracked. One board member looked sick. The other was already on his phone. And Thad just stared at the ground like a man reviewing every choice that had led him here. Lester's tow truck came out and dragged that fancy SUV out one embarrassed inch at a time while Glenwood documented the whole thing from the fence line. That night, Beverly posted in the neighborhood Facebook group calling it intimidation. But this time, the comments turned on her. A resident named Wallace, who'd grown up on a farm, wrote, "With respect, Beverly, you parked on the man's land without permission. I'm not sure what outcome you expected." Support started evaporating in real time. At mediation, Prescott laid out the harassment log, the legal costs, the inspection, the defamation screenshots, the trespass report. And then he slid the non-harassment covenant across the table. Beverly's attorney read it once, then again, then asked for a recess. When he came back, he looked like he'd aged a decade in 20 minutes. Ridgerest had already been copied. Their Phase 2 dreams were suddenly sitting on top of a public record mine. So Prescott pressed for the thing I wanted most, not just a check, but a public ending. Beverly had also filed a rezoning petition, and withdrawing it publicly became part of the deal. Not through the clerk, not by email. On the record in front of the county board, the press, and half the town. That meeting was packed. Beverly stood up and withdrew the petition in careful corporate language, meant to make surrender sound strategic. Then Supervisor Braddock nodded and said, "For the record, the Warden agricultural parcel remains classified as agricultural use consistent with its designation since 1951. Nobody cheered. This was a county meeting, not a ball game. But the room let out one long breath at once, and I'll tell you something, that's what justice sounds like in a small town. Not loud, just certain. Beverly resigned 3 days later. The defamatory posts came down and were replaced with a public retraction. Ridgerest recorded a formal reaffirmation of the covenant. My legal fees were covered along with the losses they caused. And in April, the Pruitts quietly listed their house and vanished from Sunrise Estates. What stayed with me wasn't even the money, though. I'd be lying if I said watching that Lexus get winched out of my field didn't feel mighty satisfying. It was the lesson. The people who posture the hardest usually think power means pressure, enough paperwork, enough reputation, damage enough money, and regular folks will fold. But real power is steadier than that. It's patience, it's records, it's knowing the law better than the person trying to weaponize it, and it's understanding that greed nearly always gets sloppy right before it gets caught. I used part of that settlement to help start the Warden Agricultural Scholarship for local kids from farm families who want to study agriculture and maybe come back home to keep land working instead of watching it get paved over. Because this fight was never just about Beverly. It was about whether a family farm still gets to exist when other people decide its highest value is a subdivision phase map. It's spring now. The wheat came in strong. The ditch works exactly like it was supposed to. The toe marks are nearly grown over. Grit sleeps under my truck while I finish paperwork on the porch. Most folks from Sunrise Estates wave now when they pass. Funny how much friendlier a boundary gets once everybody remembers where it is. So let me ask you something. When somebody uses rules, money and reputation to try to run a man off, where exactly is the line between justice and payback? And if you'd been standing there with me that morning, coffee in hand, excavator rumbling behind you, Beverly Pruitt in your wheat field talking about the good of the community, would you have handled it the same way? Tell me in the comments who was right, who went too far, and have you ever had somebody in power try to push you around until you finally pushed back?